magistrate Protestant reformers tried to. But essentially what happened after the break of most of the German speakers from Rome was the formation of the Jesuit Order. Now, the Jesuit Order, if Roman Catholicism teaches semi-Pelagianism, Jesuitism teaches hyper or crypto-Pelagianism. In other words, they essentially out-Pelagius Pelagius himself. Everything that they believe is promulgated on the idea of works. As a matter of fact, they were the ones who coined the phrase, "the end justifies the means." And what that translates into theologically is that they can violate the Ten Commandments and still stay in favor with God, actually attain approval from God by violating the Ten Commandments and focusing those violations towards the suppression of heresy. Now the problem is obviously that the Jesuit order teaches a works-based covenant, which is contrary to Scripture, so they themselves are heretics, essentially. So essentially what you come out with is an order, a holy order within the church that is not only heretical, but downright dangerous. And there is a lengthy battle that would ensue between Jesuitism and Jansenism. And although the Jansenist side won many sympathizers, including a couple of popes, they were eventually discredited in the eyes of Rome by the Jesuits, and the Jansenists were declared heretics and were thus persecuted. And essentially what happened was that these Jansenists, those that were left, fled to Holland and sought refuge in the Old Catholic Church, the Union of Utrecht. Now Utrecht itself stayed in congregation with Rome, but at the same time became a sanctuary for Jansenism. Now, you flash forward about 200 years later, after the French Revolution, after the Enlightened period lived and died essentially, and after all of the chaos that ensued afterwards, and you come to the 19th century. There was a brief period where the Jesuit order was dissolved and banished from the Roman Catholic Church, and this was done with the assistance of active Jansenists working in France and in other parts of Europe. And what happened was this coincided with the time period in which many Jesuits were beginning to dabble in meddling in the secular political affairs through various Masonic groups, such as the Bavarian Illuminati and a couple of others. And essentially what happened was, after the order was reestablished, it became even more powerful than it was before, and it eventually began the task of overrunning the entire Roman Catholic Church. Jesuitism was an approved belief system within the Roman Catholic Church, but it didn't control it until a good bit later. It was at the time of the enshrining of Vatican I that I personally believe, and this is me giving an opinion on this based on what I know. This isn't something that I can fully prove, but it's a suspicion I have basically, and that is that the Jesuit order is the real powerhouse behind the current Roman Catholic Church, and that the white pope, the current accepted leader of the papacy in the Vatican, is a puppet dancing on the string of the black pope, ergo the general of the Jesuit army, the so-called Vatican assassins. Now, over the time since Jesuitism has been founded, it's been charged with many tasks, but the chief one was the destruction of the Protestant Reformation and also the Radical Reformation, and the reinstatement of the dominance of Rome over all of Christendom. So what that means essentially is that Jesuitism is diametrically opposed to any kind of Christianity that does not conform to the Roman Catholic model as it exists today. So essentially we could view the Roman Catholic Church as being the Jesuit Catholic Church in many respects. After the enshrinement of Vatican I, something began happening within the Protestant churches and also within the recently formed Union of Utrecht, and that was the liberalization of theology. There are a lot of conspiracy theories floating around right now as to Jesuit involvement in all of this. What I can say for certain with regard to this is that the Jesuit Order is most likely responsible for the advent of Arminianism, which is a form of theology present in most Protestant churches, which teaches that faith itself is a work, and it is a covenant of works that man shares with God, and that thus man is capable of gaining favor and ultimately attaining salvation with God through the act of faith. Now, for anybody who has a clear understanding of Augustinian theology, this is the work of all works, if you consider that all of the other works are, as the Bible describes, soiled cloth. So essentially, the belief is among these Arminians that a person who is almost dead in sin, not quite completely dead the way Augustine clearly states, and the way the Bible itself states, if you've got a good translation of it, they state that a person is mostly dead, and that the only act of being born again that can be committed is the act of faith, which is the biggest act of all that one can commit. It takes a lot of sidestepping of logic for someone who is well versed in the scriptures to make this kind of leap. But surprisingly enough, this mode of thought has gained a lot of favor within mainline Protestant churches, primarily in liberal Lutheran churches, some Presbyterian churches, and it is rampant in the Anglican Church. And unfortunately, it's engulfing the old Catholic Church along with the Anglican Church, insofar as certain Anglican churches share communion with the old Catholic churches. Now, this mode of thought first popped up by a fellow by the name of Arminius, who was alive around in relatively close proximity to John Calvin, pretty close to around the time of the Protestant Reformation. And the Jesuit Order actually claimed, I don't have the source at hand, but I'll try to see if I can find it and put it in the description, but there were Jesuits who had claimed that Arminius was one of them, and that he was a plant that was put directly in to corrupt the various Calvinistic Presbyterian churches. And like